What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review the new animated movie, Batman The Long Halloween Part 1, which came out earlier today in the US. Part 2 is due on July 27th, but this film's an adaptation of Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's legendary story arc, which ran for 13 issues back in 1996 and 1997. And I've got my bruised and battered and well-loved copy right here. I've read it many times over the years, and not to worry, I won't spoil who the killer is. Plus, there's a good chance that the killer might have a different identity or a fresh twist, in that this movie does take a few liberties with the source material. But I don't want to overstate the changes. Writer Tim Sheridan and director Chris Palmer clearly love and respect the original comic, and this first movie is obviously designed to appeal to diehard fans of the source material. And that is absolutely the right strategy to take, because The Long Halloween is one of the most influential DC comics ever written, and we've already seen its impact on movies like Christopher Nolan's 2008 film The Dark Knight. All those great scenes between Batman, James Gordon, and Harvey Dent, those come directly out of The Long Halloween, as well as little details like that giant pile of money that the Joker burns, although the burning of that cash happens under very different circumstances, both in the comic as well as in this new movie. But if you're unfamiliar with the premise, The Long Halloween takes place early in the careers of Batman, Gordon, and Dent. They're all still in the process of becoming the iconic characters that we know and love. And originally, back in the day, The Long Halloween was a continuation of Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's legendary Batman Year One storyline from 1987, where organized crime figures like Carmine Falcone were first introduced. The fact that Tom Wilkinson played Falcone in Batman Begins in 2005 is further evidence of the enduring influence and popularity of these seminal comics. But with The Long Halloween, we have a serial killer on the loose who's killing these organized crime figures, and always on a major holiday like Halloween or Thanksgiving or Christmas. The name of the story comes from the fact that in the original 13-issue series, the story begins on Halloween and ends the following year on Halloween, hence The Long Halloween. And what's great about this premise is how it forces Batman, Gordon, and Dent all to wrestle with what their principles are when it comes to fighting crime. What lines are they willing to cross? And to what extent are they willing to let this case wreak havoc on their own personal lives? Gordon's still just a captain trying to work his way up. Bruce Wayne's enjoying a budding romance with Selena Kyle. And Harvey Dent, he's overworked to the point where his marriage is suffering horribly from the strain. And if you've never read it, I strongly encourage everyone to do so. And if you're on the fence about whether or not to watch the movie, here's where I stand on Warner Brothers Animation. And I hope this won't sound too controversial, but I think Warner Brothers Animation might be the best corner in all of entertainment when it comes to getting superheroes right. They make faithful, stylish interpretations of classic stories. Their movies look fantastic, and they managed to make one great movie after another. Last year, Apocalypse War as well as Superman Man of Tomorrow were two of my favorite movies of 2020. It's obvious that the people behind these movies, they know their comics, they love their comics, but it's not a barrier to entry. Everybody's invited to the party to enjoy these movies. So yes, I heartily recommend this movie. I thoroughly enjoyed watching it, but let me get to some of the reasons why. And this section's going to be spoiler light, so once again, if you don't want any spoilers, now is the time to bail out, but don't worry, Holiday's secret identity is safe with me. But let's start with the opening credit sequence, which honestly was my favorite part of the movie, strangely enough. What was great is how the credits, they incorporated a bunch of Tim Sale's beautiful art from the comic, while intercutting with animated sequences that flesh out the backdrop of this movie and bring the viewer up to speed with a series of vignettes and scenarios that make this world already feel fully fleshed out. Keep in mind that this movie was supposed to be the first animated movie in the new DC animation continuity, instead of Superman Man of Tomorrow. So this is pretty much a fresh, clean slate for all the DC characters after Apocalypse War last year wipe the slate clean. But just this credit sequence alone, it's one of my favorite new pieces of media that I've seen on the big or small screen all year. Now let's talk about adapting the spirit of the comic versus a word-for-word replication. There are a handful of scenes that are incredibly faithful, with even some dialogue directly lifted from the comic, but this movie is also doing its own thing. It's simplifying and streamlining the story where necessary, and adds in some big action set pieces that are brand new, the biggest of which is this giant fight scene where Batman takes on some characters who weren't even in the original story at all. But not to worry, the fight scene's totally badass. But one ingredient that I'm kind of glad that they dropped is Jeff Loeb's overuse of classic lines from his favorite gangster movies. In the original comic, Jeff Loeb borrowed heavily from The Godfather and a little bit from Goodfellas, but it got to the point where it was excessive, especially if you know those movies well, with a lot of these lines of dialogue becoming incredibly distracting, taking me out of the reading experience. So what this movie does instead, it embraces the spirit of the Falcones and how they're loosely based on the Corleones. They feel like classic mafia, but they're not carbon copies from Francis Ford Coppola's movie. And in this movie, Carmine Falcone, he's particularly good, and I like how we see just how much common ground he has with the Wayne family, and that, like Bruce Wayne, he believes in Gotham. He just does so in his own unique way that happens to involve killing people who get in his way. but he's this great twisted mirror image to the vigilante role that Bruce Wayne is still trying to figure out, because a lot of this movie is all about Bruce Wayne working on and developing his classic detective skills, which are still very much in a state of infancy in this particular story. And one of the best parts of this movie is Catwoman. She enjoys some really great scenes, and just like in the comic, she's a major part of the story, especially the scenes that introduce some really fun sexual tension with the Batman. And the movie's gone with a slightly different look for her suit, but it totally works for this movie and reminds me a great deal of Bruce Timm's classic animated series. And there's one kind of scandalous subject that I have to address because it's been trending like crazy lately on Twitter due to a scene being removed from the Harley Quinn cartoon. And that's the subject of whether or not Batman enjoys going down on Catwoman. And I will offer one spoiler for this movie. No, Batman does not go down on Catwoman in this cartoon either. Apparently some suit over at Warner Brothers thought that oral sex might diminish Batman's reputation as a heroic figure, or more importantly, might diminish his viability as a toy being marketed to children. But of course, the discussion of banning that scene in the Harley Quinn series led to Zack Snyder chiming in on Twitter, saying that Batman giving Catwoman a good tongue lashing is, for him, official canon. So we might as well accept the idea now that this topic is not going away anytime soon, and I predict that it's only a matter of time before we get a scene like that in either a movie or a show. And honestly, Catwoman's one of the hottest comic book characters ever. All of us want to go down on her, so let's just be honest about it. But one of my favorite ingredients that this movie uses really well is this idea that Batman has actually changed Gotham due to his presence alone. My favorite scene in the 2008 film The Dark Knight is when the Joker tells Batman how he's changed the city forever. And much like in that scene in The Dark Knight, The Long Halloween Part 1 explores the idea that Batman's presence alone in Gotham, he's like a beacon or a lighthouse for freaks. He just attracts them from all corners, whether that's Solomon Grundy living down in the sewers, or homicidal maniacs like the Joker. And in the comic, it was James Gordon who pointed out this idea to Batman, but in this movie, it's a different character. But the fact remains the same, that the number of homicidal maniacs in Gotham has doubled since Batman first came on the scene, no matter how much you might try to keep them in Arkham. And speaking of freaks, I got to give a very special shout out to actor Troy Baker for his brilliant work as the Joker in this. He sounds eerily like Mark Hamill's interpretation of the character from the animated series, so much so I honestly thought it was Mark Hamill. And for the cast overall, the acting is just first rate across the board, especially Naya Rivera as Catwoman, an actress who sadly died in 2020. And I have to give a very special shout out to actor David Dastmalchian, if I'm saying that correctly. I love this actor. I've seen him in a million things. He was in the original Dark Knight, and he's also in James Gunn's upcoming film, The Suicide Squad. He's a marvelous actor, but in this movie, he plays Calendar Man. And his performance is just bone-chilling. I mean, if you look at the original images from the comic as drawn by Tim Sale, he's a very enigmatic, mysterious, kind of disturbing figure. And of all the performances in the movie, you could easily make a case that David is the standout performance of everyone. But the list goes on and on. Josh Duhamel is incredible as Harvey Dent. Jensen Ackles has an interesting take on Batman. At any rate, high fives across the board for all the vocal talent that was involved in this particular movie. In closing, I'll simply say that this is a fantastic whodunit. Even for folks who've read the story, the movie features enough surprises and changes where honestly it kept me guessing right up until the ending, and I can't fucking wait to see how it all wraps up in part 2 a few weeks from now. But more than anything, I just felt relief and pleasure while watching it, because I'm rapidly turning into one of those mean old bastards that hates everything he sees, but I like to believe that I still have room in my cold dead heart to embrace fresh interpretations of classic material. And with this movie, I just had an absolute blast watching it, so I guess there's still hope for me as a lover of film and television. But that's all I have to say for now. I'll obviously be coming back to revisit this topic in a few weeks' time. I hope you enjoyed this review. Once again, definitely check out the comic, definitely check out the movie. And if you enjoyed this video, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, all that wonderful, beautiful stuff. But if you want to talk more in the meantime about comics or movies, whatever, hunt me down on Twitter at Geeking Out. But I can't thank you enough for watching. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.